Hello and welcome to Culture Shock on the Conscious Resistance. This is John Vibes, and today I'm going to talk about the developing situation in Ukraine and how many are calling it the start of World War III. Now, I agree that it is kind of scary having two countries with nuclear weapons that are being so openly hostile with each other. But at the same time, it's really important to point out that history will probably show that World War III started a long time ago. It could have perhaps started just after 9/11 when the United States government invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, or it could have even started even sooner during the so-called Cold War when the East and the West basically were at war with each other in small territories that they were fighting over. They were having proxy wars in countries that were technically weaker, had weaker militaries, weaker economies, that they were fighting over resources for in these areas. So just because they weren't invading and pillaging each other's capital cities or homelands or whatever you want to call it, there was still a large scale global war taking place. And there were still people being killed. There were still homes, villages, towns, cities being invaded and bombed. So I have a hard time understanding how this hasn't been World War III all along. Just because it doesn't take the same form that we saw in previous world wars, that doesn't mean that it just hasn't evolved into something new. With the Cold War, there were proxy wars in Afghanistan and all throughout that area where there is still struggle now, in Africa, of course, too. And that's where all of this has played out. And now they don't even need actual armies. They can just fund rebel groups and they can use mercenary armies that really have no association with any government technically, but behind the scenes they do. So I really just think that the way that war has been waged has been changed for public relations purposes. So it can still be sold to people because people continually get sick of this and it's unnatural, it's immoral, it's horrible on every level. And the average people of every country, as many intelligent people have said before, do not want war. It is the people who run these governments and these gangs that are perpetuating this mentality that war is necessary. And all of these large scale global wars are being waged to build empires. A lot of times now today it's being presented as unrelated incidences in various areas of the earth that are police actions and humanitarian wars, when in all reality it is just the same thing that it's always been. It's just a conquest. So all these people getting very excited about World War III, they have good reason to be concerned that things are getting more serious and things are getting more dangerous for the large empires that are waging these wars in other people's lands. It might be coming home soon. So just because World War III may be coming home soon doesn't mean that it just started. It started a very long time ago, and I think everybody around the world probably realizes that. It's just those of us in the West and probably in so-called superpowers like Russia and China, they may not see it that way either, just because they don't have to deal with their houses being bombed and their cities being invaded. So it is very important for us to look past our own culture and our own cultural mindset when looking at really important issues like this. Because when people say world war, that means basically that the whole world is at war or at risk of being at war. And that's exactly what's going on right now, and that's exactly what's been going on for a long time. A lot of people have this cartoonish kind of version in history that we have been sold through the propaganda and the media and the education system, that there are supervillains and superheroes in these big world wars, and that is just what we have been fed. That's not reality. There are gangs fighting over turf, essentially, and that's all it's ever been, and that's what it is now. So, even though the face of war has changed, and now it looks like certain governments keep their hands clean, that isn't always the case, and most of the time it really isn't. Even if they're subjugating their own populaces, their hands still aren't clean. But in terms of war, the whole world is definitely at war, and the whole world is definitely at risk of being at war. Just because the larger countries aren't invading each other does not mean that proxy wars do not count, because they do, and a lot of people are getting hurt and getting killed in them, and they are people who are far more defenseless than we would be in that situation, because most of them are completely poor and disarmed with no way of defending themselves whatsoever. And that's exactly why they're being taken advantage of to wage war, because after generations and generations of all of this nonsense, the Western world doesn't want that on their doorstep anymore. And neither does anybody else, but unfortunately, they don't have much of a say in the matter at this point. Until next time, this is John Vibes on Culture Shock on the Conscious Resistance. Peace.